So first of all, thank you so much for joining today and welcome to your first CIWEM Pride hosted event. And today we'll be discussing if we think that the WEM LGBTQ+ community is visible enough. And so just a couple of housekeeping rules before we start, just so that we make sure that we're all in line. So this webinar will be recorded. All recordings will be put up on the CIWEM website, and once we get authorization from the speakers today, we will be able to put it on a YouTube channel. And Barbara will be sharing the link in the chat now. If you experience any technical issues, please put it in the chat section on the Zoom at the bottom of your screen. And throughout the presentation, you are able to put your Q&A, so your questions or comments about the speakers in the Q&A section. And a Q&A session will happen at the end of the event. So don't worry, those questions aren't going anywhere and we'll make sure we get back to them. So as I said earlier, I am super excited for this first event, and a lot of work and attention has gone into every single detail. So I'm Francesca Brambat, and I am CIWEM's executive assistant, and I'm responsible for leading the D&I actions here at CIWEM. To give a bit of how we are all here today. So in December 2020, Sarah Ward, one of our honorary fellows, approached me with the potential opportunity of creating an LGBTQ+ network. So we started it off with a coffee roulette in March last year. And after an hour of discussion and brainstorming, it was clear for everyone that it was so important to have this network in place, not only for the community, but also for allies. And I'm so happy to have worked with this network over the last 12 months, getting us up and ready. We've got a website page, we've got a LinkedIn page, and we'll be sharing all these links in the chat now and a little bit later to see how you can get involved. So I know I do love the sound of my own voice, but you're obviously not here to listen to me talk. So I'm going to hand over to Karen Andrews from the EA and Colin Liptrop, also from the EA, to talk about raising awareness and education about the LGBTQ+ issues in the WEM sector. So I will put myself off mute and on mute, sorry, and I will hand over to Colin and Karen. Thank you so much for joining us today.
You're welcome. Thanks, Francesca, and welcome to everyone. Very good afternoon. I'm Karen Andrews. My colleague Colin is here too, who will introduce himself shortly. I'm just going to confirm what it says on the screen. I'm Karen Andrews. My pronouns are she, her. I'm the chair of the Environment Agency's LGBT+ network, and I'm also a senior advisor in regulated industry. I've worked for the Environment Agency for over 23 years. I joined shortly after graduating from university in 1998. An attractive place for me to work, not just because of the sector, but also because I felt it was an inclusive employer. So most of my work has been involved around waste regulation, and we cover a wide range of industrial sectors in regulated industry also. So we've got, you know, quite a wide range of companies that we work with. So my involvement in the Environment Agency and a bit of my background. So I'm nearly 47 years of age. When I was growing up in the UK, Section 28 was in as an act which prevented from local authorities, which included schools, talking about homosexuality. So when I was at school, it was very, very difficult for people to talk about their sexuality at school. So that made it pretty difficult to really come out and think about who I was. And I didn't actually come out until I went to university in my second year. And it was one of a really, really liberating moment for me, and just to be myself. really shortly after that, I joined the Environment Agency, and being a gay woman, I would say at that time, it hasn't always been easy. Yeah, I think the main thing is that I have seen a shift and change in culture, not only in my own organisation, but in the wider community as well. So the Environment Agency, it's done lots of things. So the network was set up quite some time ago, and in its early years, we had different people chairing the network, and soon gathered momentum in its cause, really. And it was to raise awareness, like we are today, about LGBTQ plus issues, not just in the workplace, but in the wider community, and thinking about really just getting information across to people about how you can help. So for me, some of the things that have helped me have certainly been some of the visible symbols. So I don't know if you're all aware of the Pride progress flag that we've got in the background, but it's something we generally put up in our meetings. So with it being LGBT plus History Month, it's one of those visible symbols that shows an inclusive workplace. And I think for the WEM sector, WEM sector, I've had mostly positive experiences as a gay woman. I think one of the most challenging things is probably the energy that you take to always come out. So no matter where we are, what workplace we're in, you're meeting new people from new companies and new organisations, and you may change job. And when you do change job and you're working with different people, then it's about being open and honest about who you are. And sometimes that can take a bit of energy, because it's, well, I'm coming out yet again to a bunch of new people. And what's really great is when you come out, the reactions from people, or I should probably rephrase and say lack of reaction, that it's just, it is the norm, and that people, are generally accepting these days. So as I was saying earlier, it hasn't always been easy being a gay woman in my career, and fairly recently got married nearly 4 years ago. And just after that, in one of the offices that I was working in, which is a shared workspace, I happened to overhear a conversation about a lesbian wedding. And in that conversation, it went on for a few minutes, and I was listening and thinking, this isn't a great conversation. It's not nice for me to listen to this. And someone should be doing something about this and intervening. And at that point, it was a kind of a realization that, well, it's you, Karen, you'll have to intervene. So I discreetly approached one of the people that was involved in the conversation and just introduced myself as a member of the network at that point, and an employee of the Environment Agency, and just described how that conversation made me feel as a gay woman. Now, the person was really, really apologetic, and started off by saying they didn't know that I was in that workspace that day. And I explained that it doesn't matter if I'm there, I'm gay, but it's also LGBTQ plus. So, it could be someone who is, another identity, or it could be somebody who has a friend, a family member, son, daughter, whoever, who they're offending. So following that conversation, the person that was involved in that conversation, they went back to their colleagues and explained the situation. As I say, he was very, very apologetic, and often when he sees me now, he asks how I am and how things are going. Now, that was a really respectful conversation, and for me it took a lot of energy, because I found it quite upsetting that someone would talk like that. But the main message is that to really think about those things, and also what you can do about that. Allyship is so important. That day after that conversation, I felt quite drained because it was quite emotive. As with if there was an ally who happened to be around and they approached that and said this kind of a conversation isn't respectful and that it might cause upset to people, then that would be easier for them because they're perhaps less emotive around it. So strong allyship is great. As I say, I think you know, things have evolved quite a lot in the UK, so especially for the Environment Agency. So our network provide a support network for our colleagues who are LGBT plus, but also for families. So for example, we've got parents of trans children that join the network, and everyone's welcome. So we're quite a large network. Colin perhaps will be able to tell you how many friends of our network that we have, but I know we reached a milestone last year or two with that. And I think as chair of the network, for me, I'm immensely proud of the work that the network do. There are so many people active and involved, and for my organisation, just really that most people are on board, everyone's on board, and the general things that we see are really misunderstanding or people not knowing the things that they're talking about. So we do talk about having respectful conversations, and I would just ask you to, in your workplaces, to have those respectful conversations. If you don't understand something, just ask somebody respectfully, and they're probably really open to have that discussion with you. So with that, I was mentioning allyship. One of my amazing colleagues, Colin, is here as an ally today and is going to talk to you now from his perspective as an ally of LGBT+. Thanks.
Thanks, Karen. Good afternoon, everybody. My name's Colin Liptrot. My pronouns are he and him. I've worked for the Environment Agency for just over 21 years in flood and coastal risk management. I'm currently in the Northwest MICA team, that's mechanical, electrical, instrumentation, control and automation. As Karen said, I'm here today to talk about allyship to our LGBTQ plus friends, family and colleagues. Just to pick up on something Karen said, I think currently we're at about 10,000 people in the Environment Agency, and a number of signed up allies are at about 1,500. So it's quite a lot of people actively supporting this network, actively involved in all the events that we do, supporting Ida Hobbit Day, supporting the everything else that as a network we do. Being an ally, a number of us did it as on an informal basis in the past. So we'd be asked to support prides, we'd be asked to support information days, we'd go along, we'd help with that, we'd do it. And then we would get we'd assist, we'd help, and then we got asked, were any of us prepared to do the role more formally as part of the LGBT plus, as it was then, network, be a formal lead friend to the network, and there were two of us that were willing to do it. Neither of us could do it full time, so we moved into that role on a much more formal basis, and from doing that we were able to deliver a lot more on behalf of our friends and colleagues and their families. I've witnessed the effects of prejudice against me colleagues and the effects it's had on them, not so much in work, generally stuff that's going on outside. And I've been told how important it is to see visible friends, just how important straight cisgender people are in creating LGBTQ plus friendly working spaces. So what is an ally? I've been doing it a long time. I've learned some things. I've still got a lot to learn. But the first thing we're not there to do is out people. That's not our role. We're there to support people and be visible for those people who need that support or want that support, and be visible there when needed. So we wear visible signs, badges. I don't know if that's the right way up. Lots of things so that people can see we're there. People know, new LGBT plus people coming into the organisation, people who discover that they are LGBT plus after a number of years, know that there's a safe space. We're also not there to do what we might think is the right thing to do. We need to discuss with our LGBTQ plus colleagues and friends what it is they want. What do they want from us as people outside the community? What do people need from us? Because it might not be what we think it is. And we need to recognise that homophobia, transphobia, interphobia, biphobia, are not problems for the LGBTQ plus community to solve. They're delivered in the main by straight cisgender people like myself, and it's up to us to be visible in saying it's not right, it's not acceptable. We need to make the changes to help stop this and make it unacceptable, exactly as we would with racism and other prejudice. However, as employees, we can't do everything. It's really, really important for senior management to be visibly supportive, giving clear messages on diversity and inclusion throughout the organisations we work in. And preferably, we should have written policies that state the intention of the business and how they'll be managed on a business level. And one of the most important things I've found is to have time to do what's needed for our colleagues. So it needs to be a core business objective. It's not something we can pick up and put down and decide it's nice to do this week. So it's something we have to do. It's something we have to do all day, every day, forever. It's not something for this month or this year or for LGBT History Month or Pride Month. It's something that needs to happen. We need to have policies, we need to champion them, and we need to ensure that the outcomes are delivered through the business. Physical resources are also important, so allocated funding to buy those resources. If you have a team that wants to attend Pride events, for example, quite often it costs money. There needs to be funding. There needs to be funding for lanyards, badges, flags, certificates to be printed, that kind of thing, so that the visibility is there. I've already mentioned it, but visibility of allies and also other LGBTQ plus people in the workplace is especially important for new employees who are unsure how they will be received in a new place of work. The visual confirmation that they are actually entering a safe space for people can be one of the most reassuring things on the first day at work. Also, I've talked about physical signs. We also use email signatures to say that we are friends of the network or members of the network, internally and externally, so that people will see that information that we are a supportive organisation. And we have actually learned that people have come to our organisation after seeing email signatures relating to the LGBT plus network. From a business point of view, LGBT plus is covered by the Equality Act 2010. Gender reassignment, marriage, civil partnership, sex, but not gender, and sexual orientation are all covered. and it's unlawful to discriminate against any protected characteristic. We owe a duty of care to the people who work with us and for us, so we need to make sure that we're doing the right thing from that point of view as well, both to protect the people where necessary. For example, in some countries, LGBTQ plus rights don't exist. The local community may be openly hostile to non-heterosexual or non-cisgender or non-conforming, gender-conforming people. For example, it's still illegal in around 70 countries to be LGBTQ plus, and around 11 countries it's still potentially punishable by death. So if we're sending people to some of these countries, we need to be aware. In some countries, the murder of trans women, especially trans women of colour, is not even reported or investigated by the authorities. One area that's often overlooked, and as friends we can, or allies, we can help that, is to make sure that we've got specific facilities where needed. For example, for trans, gender fluid, intersex, non-binary employees, have we got suitable changing rooms or toilets? Is everything binary for male, female, or do we make space where non-binary employees can actually go? Are our forms right for everybody? In some cases, some forms say male, female. What about somebody who's intersex? Some people can't fill a form in, and the message is you don't exist. It's these simple changes we can make to what we have. And do you need a pronoun? What does it actually add? Is the name enough? You know, do you actually have to identify someone's gender in a certain in a certain way on a certain form? If not, leave it off if it's irrelevant. One thing we can do to help support our trans, gender fluid, intersex and non-binary colleagues is to visibly state our pronouns in written media, or state them at the beginning of a meeting. A person's pronouns internal, it's how we all feel inside, and it may not be how we are perceived by others. And whether we are they, she, he, or some other pronoun, they're all equally valid, and the parts of us as individuals, they're what make us who we are. Buying pan employees, many people would probably think that somebody who's attracted to someone of the same gender is gay. Not necessarily. That person could be bi or pan. They can also, on occasion, find themselves excluded from lesbian and gay spaces. And it's also really important to remember that all of us, whoever we are, have lots of parts to our individuality. So not all gay people are the same, not all trans people are the same, not all straight people are the same. We're all different. And it's important to consider that intersectionality of everybody we work with, everybody we meet, our families, our friends, our colleagues. For example, the needs of a Black trans Muslim would be very, very different from maybe a white lesbian atheist. And all these different parts of our who we are can be affected by what's happening at work, what's being done to us, what's the environment we're working in. So we can't generalize about stuff like that. And I'm just going to finish on a couple of years ago, England's cricket player Joe Root was praised for his response to alleged homophobia. The cricketer told a member of the West Indies team there's nothing wrong with being gay in an open cricket field after he heard some homophobic comments. And he had the strength to actually say to the other person playing cricket that it wasn't acceptable. There's nothing wrong with gay people. There's nothing wrong with trans people. There are colleagues, there are friends, and as allies, we're happy to support them, happy to do what we need to make things equal. As a straight person, and I've said it before, I go out with my partner, virtually invisible, and lots of LGBTQ plus people can't have what I've got in 2022, and that means there's something wrong somewhere. But thanks a lot, and I'm happy for any questions later on.
Thank you, Colin. A massive insight from Karen and Colin there, and I hope that those have been small messages that we can only give in a 10-minute slot, but I do hope that that has given you enough information to start thinking about those small changes that we can do, and that is something that we will go into in the Q&A later on if you're able to stay with us a little longer. I think I've forgotten how to press a button now, so let's carry on with the agenda. So oh yes, sorry. For our next segment, we have Mike Wheeler, who's a senior water engineer from the Canal and River Trust. This section is slightly different to the previous one. This is sharing personal stories, and it may include some very moving elements. And ahead of Mike speaking, I do want to thank him for sharing this story with us today.
Okay, hi everyone. So I don't quite know how it happened, but to misquote the great Quentin Crisp, who famously wrote The Naked Civil Servant, it seems I have become one of England's grand old stately homos, at least that is within the WEM sector. And it is perhaps on that basis that I have been asked to speak to you about my own experiences and reflect on the changes I have seen in my life during the 50 years since the setting up of Stonewall in the UK. I'm a senior water engineer at the Canal and River Trust. The Trust has a Rainbow Ally scheme to which I am signed up, and the scheme is set up to address issues of gender, of race, of disability, and of sexuality. Now, I understand all of that, and I shall always do my best to call out inequality or bullying, banter, and so on, should I come across it. But my main reason for signing up is because I want to be a positive role model for younger colleagues who may be struggling with coming out. I want to say to them, it's okay, you can be yourself. Look at me, it's okay, it's all turned out fine. But you know, my story is not in any way unusual. Many of you, I am sure, will recognize and relate to my own experiences. That's the whole point. We are not alone, and many of our experiences will be the same. So, 50 years ago, it was 1972. I was a frightened little 12-year-old in my second year at a boys' public school in Warwick in the Midlands. It wasn't long before puberty hit me like a steam train, and I fell totally and completely in love with my best friend at school, and our friendship developed into a rather fumbling and frankly confusing exploration of love and friendship. To me, it was wonderful and the most natural thing in the world. But then I noticed people around me beginning to notice. The teasing started. I started to realize I didn't fit into this testosterone-fueled world around me. I realized I had to keep my thoughts and feelings to myself. At 16, I really wanted to join the RAF, but instinctively, I knew that that was never going to work. At that time, and remember, this was the 1970s, the only gay role models I remember were Larry Grayson on The Generation Game or John Humphreys in Are You Being Served? Or Danny LaRue, the female impersonator. These were very camp and comedic characters. There's nothing wrong with that, but I just couldn't identify with that. I didn't want to be laughed at. I didn't fit in. I retreated into my closet and I firmly locked the door, hiding my feelings. And as I got into my later teens, I started to get into trouble. Nothing serious, but I see now I was pushing back. I dropped out of A-levels. I tried a couple of false start career paths, trying to figure out my life and where I fitted in. And so it was, at 18, I had begun adult life, living a lie, going along with the banter and the jokes, disappointing and hurting girls in my life, trying to be someone I was not. I thought, I hoped it was an adolescent phase that would pass, but it wasn't passing. I tried a brief foray into the embryonic gay scene in Coventry and Birmingham. Some of you may have heard of the Nightingale nightclub in Birmingham. In those days, it had one gay night in the week, Tuesday, I think. And there was one pub in Coventry called the Rose and Crown, known for its gay clientele. But again, I just felt I didn't fit in, and I retreated even further into that closet of mine. In 1982, I traveled in India for 6 months, following the hippie trail and trying to find myself. I came back to a small town, but with a renewed energy. This was in the early 1980s. It was the time of punk and the new romantics and of anti-establishment feelings. Gay people were starting to speak out and becoming more visible. Very slowly, I started to peek out of that closet. I told just a very few close friends who it felt safe to tell. And then came my lucky break. I got a job in London. I left the small town and I moved to the big city on March 13th, 1984. I'm sure that it was in that year that I stumbled across what must have been one of the very early gay pride marches. It consisted of a small group of rather forlorn-looking people marching slowly together around Leicester Square and carrying banners. I wanted to join them, but I was standing watching with my mother and my brother who were visiting, and I was still very closeted. I bought copies of Time Out magazine, which had a gay section with club listings and Lonely Hearts ads, and I tentatively started to explore the London gay scene. One night, I bumped into a work colleague at Heaven nightclub, and we became friends, and he showed me around the scene, which he certainly knew very well. But still, I couldn't come out at work. I couldn't tell my straight friends, and I couldn't tell my family. It was at this time that we started to become aware of HIV and AIDS. I think for me, that was the start of my coming out. A friend from school, who I was best man at his wedding, and who with his wife was living in London, and who still thought that I was straight. He said to me, standing in a pub one night, that he thought gay men deserved to die of AIDS because they were all so promiscuous. I don't know where he got that line from, the Sun newspaper probably, but a lot of people were thinking the same around that time. I was so upset and angry that I came out to him there and then, asking him if he thought that I deserved to die. Now, there is a happy ending to that story. He's fine with it, and I have changed his opinion somewhat. Then my mother read something I had written, and she reacted very badly. But you know, to be fair to her, it was a shock. She'd had no time to come to terms with it, whereas I had been coming to terms with my sexuality for years. I still was. So moving on, it was 1988, and Margaret Thatcher's government brought in that disgusting piece of legislation, the infamous Clause 28. It prohibited local authorities and therefore schools, from promoting homosexuality. And I remember thinking, if only I had had access to books in our school library, like those of Edmund White, whose stories for adolescents had gay characters, or if I had had teachers I could talk to, how much different would my life have been? In 1990, the political activist group Outrage emerged. They organized in-your-face events like the Gay Kiss-In, and they were actively outing gay MPs who had voted for Clause 28. The gay community was getting bigger, louder, and stronger. About that time, Ken Livingstone's Greater London Council created the London Lesbian and Gay Centre, and I joined a befriending group there, and I met lots of new gay friends. I started to go out on the London Gay Pride marches. These had started out as quite small affairs, but grew into huge marches with pride festivals in parks around London each year, and the message was quite political. My favourite chant was, "We're here, we're queer, and we're not going shopping." Another big change in the early 90s was the club scene. There was definitely a huge cultural shift in the 90s. For instance, straight women realised that gay clubs were better. The music was great, they weren't getting hassled by lager-filled straight guys, and quite frankly, the men were much better looking. And the rave scene saw people loved up, and gender and sexuality boundaries seemed to come down. But sadly, while all this was going on, AIDS was killing a lot of people around the world. I had lost a couple of friends to AIDS, and I met people who had lost partners to AIDS, but had no next of kin rights. One night I was in a pub, and I remember a man telling me how his boyfriend had been buried that day, but whose family had refused to let him attend the funeral, even though it was he who had nursed his boyfriend throughout until he went into hospital. It was just terrible. So during this time, slowly, I began to think, I'm not having this anymore. I'm not going to let anyone make me feel second best anymore. This is me. And if they don't like it, I just do not give a damn. And eventually, I kicked open the doors to that closet of mine. And you know what? It has all been fine. Okay, yes, there have been a few bigots in jobs that I've had to deal with, but for the most part, it has all been fine. By 1995, I was living on a narrowboat in Little Venice. My nickname among the small boating community there was Happy Mike. Firstly, because I was genuinely out, proud and happy for the first time. And secondly, because they thought it politically incorrect to call me Gay Mike, so fair enough. In 1996, I started working for British Waterways, that in 2012 became the Canal and River Trust. I found myself in a really safe working environment where, apart from a very few exceptions, my being gay has never been an issue. In 2002, I met my partner, Fernando. He is from Venezuela and was working and studying here on a student visa. We both wanted him to make his home here with me, but as a same-sex couple, to get his UK residency, we had to show proof that we were living as would a straight married couple. Holiday photos, joint bank account, and that sort of thing. Ken Livingstone was by then Mayor of London and had brought about something called a commitment ceremony and certificate, whereby same-sex couples could announce their commitment to one another. And so we had a proud commitment ceremony at London City Hall. Now, this certificate had no legal standing, but it supported an expensive and lengthy application to the Home Office. And we were even more proud when, 5 years after we met, Fernando was given UK citizenship at Islington Town Hall, here in Islington, where we live. It meant now that Fernando could stay with me in this country. It was 2004 that civil partnerships were finally introduced into law for same-sex couples. And in July last year, at the same Islington Town Hall, Fernando and I were married. Well, actually, it was a civil partnership, but I'm finding that that's much more of a mouthful to say. Oh, and by the way, my mum was one of the witnesses who signed the register. I can tell you it was a very wonderful and a very emotional day. So there we have it. 50 years of my life have gone by, seemingly incredibly quickly, and the world is without doubt a very different place. We started out with LGBT, and then we added Q and A and plus, and that has to be good. It's true, we have come a long way, but there is still a way to go. Over the years since I came out, I have had 7 work colleagues come out to me, some recently, and all have been struggling with telling work colleagues and their straight friends. We need to get to a place where everyone feels they can be themselves, without prejudice, without bigotry, in a safe environment. And I guess this is part of that effort. And I must tell you, that really does make me feel proud. So that's me, Happy Mike, the grand old stately homo, 61 and still going strong. And I thank you all for listening.
Thank you for sharing your story, Mike. I think I told you yesterday how thankful I was for you sharing that with us all today. And I know that sharing your story is something that will help many from the community understand that they can be their whole self, and hopefully help allies understand why their role is so vital. Sorry, the next section, we did say that we had an international speaker. Unfortunately, it's probably about 1 o'clock in the morning where they are. So we do have a recording from Professor Cara Bill from the Griffith University. So I'm just going to share my screen now. So just as a reminder, we have checked the sound and it should work. Bear with us though, because it is also IT and internet technical. So let me, I'll share my screen and my sound. If you are having any technical difficulties, please put them in the chat and I'm sure my colleagues will attend to you. I just need to figure out how to share. Right. I hope you can all see that. I will make sure I'm sharing my sound and I'll put myself on mute. Enjoy.
Hello, my name's Cara. My pronouns are she, her. I'm an associate professor at Griffith University at the Cities Research Institute, which is based in Brisbane and the Gold Coast in Queensland, Australia. I've been in the water and environment industry for at least 25 years. I'm an environmental scientist. My main research interests are around water, sanitation, hygiene. I work with Indigenous communities, and I work with smart metering and lots of data and working with people as well. So I've got a nice mix of working with people and working with spreadsheets. I'm part of the LGBTIQ plus community. I'm a lesbian. I've been with my partner for 23 years. We have 2 teenage children, 2 dogs, a mortgage, and have a very busy life. So I guess one of the reasons I wanted to talk with you today is to really give a bit of a perspective. I suspect the Australian perspective and the UK perspective might be very similar. But probably coming from someone who's been in the industry, starting out in my early 20s, in a predominantly male-dominated, straight white male industry where at times it was quite a challenge. So early on in my career, I was straight. I was with a fairly long-term boyfriend, and those colleagues that did know, or I was close enough to discuss my personal life, assumed, as I did, for a while there, that we might be getting married and so on. So it was actually more trickier working in the kind of wastewater, water engineering side of it as a female. I came across quite a few more roadblocks, and it was actually a lot trickier to be taken as seriously or to have a voice as a female in a really predominantly male world of sewage engineering back in the sort of mid-90s. So when I did come out, it was a bit tricky with those colleagues that had known me for a couple of years, and I didn't really choose sometimes to bring my whole self to work. For a while, to certain people, I would just avoid pronouns and avoid talking about anything in my personal life. As time went on, it got a lot easier, and of course over the years we've really had to be thankful for a lot of people doing some excellent advocacy work, and diversity and inclusion is a part of more of a accepted thing or an expected thing in the industry. But I've certainly come across a few interesting challenges where it's been a bit tricky. Some examples might be when I've been in a conference with some of my colleagues. So I can remember saying, oh, this is where Helen, my partner, and I stayed when we were in Sydney too, or this is, I remember when we went to that pub or whatever, and a couple of times some of my colleagues, my male colleagues, would say, oh, we don't need to know about your personal life, Cara. And I'm thinking, would you say that if it was my husband or my male partner? So that's happened a couple of times. More recently, or around that time as well, sometimes the older engineers, and nothing wrong with engineers, some of my best friends are engineers, so it's nothing about that, but certainly some of those older colleagues would comment on how often I'd wear pants, or how short my nails were, or my hair, or whatever. And again, that was in the late 90s, early 2000s, and that was a bit just a bit annoying, a bit irritating. But now, if we think of some of the opportunities, it's just brilliant seeing this wave of, as I mentioned earlier, this diversity and inclusion and advocacy for that, particularly for our younger LGBTI community. We really, us older folk, really are very passionate. Well, certainly I am on the Griffith Sciences Equity Committee as the LGBTI rep. I'm also in the Griffith Uni Pride Committee as well, and part of Pride in Water, which has been recently become incredibly popular and very visible to lots and lots of people. And this certainly wasn't there 5 years ago, let alone 10 or 20 or 15 or 25 years ago when I was there. There were no rainbows to be seen anywhere, and it was something that, was probably wasn't really talked about, or certainly not celebrated as it is today. And I've got to put a shout out to Brendan Moore. He's been brilliant in really advocating for diversity inclusion in the LGBTI space, particularly in water. And there's So yeah, look, I think we've come a long way. Certainly in the last 25 years that I've been in the sector, I can see changes, enormous number of changes. I'm definitely more comfortable, and I can see people around me in the community are also feeling much more accepted in the sector and much more visible. Of course, there's always a way to go. There's always a lot of improvements. There's been a lot of policies and agreements and written statements around diversity and inclusion within the workplace, which is brilliant. We've got to make sure that that's not just a tick and flick, that there is genuine inclusion. And I guess one simple way is to make sure our language is as best as it can be, as inclusive as it can be. For example, I still, when I do surveys or online memberships or so on, it's still often a very binary response when we do have to discuss or tick our gender. It's either still male or female, and we know that that's just absolutely not the case. That sort of thing, I think, can be very simple to change, and really by now, looking into the future, I think it's really important to recognise intersectionality. So queer people of colour, or people with a disability who also identify as gay or non-binary or so on. And also cultural competencies or cultural sensitivities around queerness or homosexuality. Sometimes it can be quite tricky for people of different faiths or from different cultures to accept themselves or to accept other people. I know for me, working in my sector and working out in remote Indigenous communities, or working in the Pacific, in the Solomon Islands or Fiji, I certainly don't talk about having a wife. I actually have some words prepared, so when they might ask me, so do you have a husband, what's his name, what does your husband do, sometimes I just find it easier to go along with that or not really mention it. In the future, maybe it would be nice to be able to do that, but it's tricky because we also need to be sensitive when we work, particularly in the water industry and environment industry. When we work in the field or in different countries, we do need to be very careful and sensitive of that as well. So I'll leave it there. Could talk for hours about this, but look, I'd really like to thank Dr. Sarah Ward for inviting me onto this really worthwhile and important webinar. I'd like to thank CIWEM for hosting this as well. I look forward to hearing the other speakers talk, and hopefully I might catch some of you when we're allowed to travel and I'm back in the UK.
Welcome back, everybody. I hope you enjoyed that lovely talk from Sarah. Cara. She said, sorry, I just saw Sarah Ward pop up on my screen. But thank you, Cara, for sharing your story and helping us see the progress, but also the journey we still need to be on. The next section of our talk today is a Q&A. I've noticed that there were some lovely comments in the chats throughout this this presentation, and I just wondered if there were any Q&A questions that anyone had at this point. So if you do have any questions, if you look at the bottom of the screen, there should be a Q&A box with the two bubbles and then there's just the chat box. But if you do have any questions, please put them in the Q&A. Don't know if anyone can see my screen, but I think I'm on the wrong one. So Q&A section, if you've got any questions, please put them into your Q&A box. I think some of the things we discussed before having this presentation with Karen and Colin was maybe discussing a little bit those key symbols and potentially what you would like to see coming into an organization, and maybe having a little bit more presence. Is there anything that you would like to add on that, Karen?
Yeah, thanks, Francesca. Certainly one of the things that the Environment Agency do is not just the visible symbols that Colin has talked about, such as our lanyards, which is really helpful in meetings, but also around the office when we are back in the offices more so. Things like coffee mugs and things like that, so rainbow mugs or mugs with our network logo on, which we've had printed off. But also regarding the email banners, the Environment Agency signs up to the Stonewall Workplace Quality Index. So this is a measure of how we're performing with inclusivity for our policies and procedures regarding LGBT+. If we get in the top 100, then we've got an emblem from Stonewall that we can use in our organisation and externally, and that really does attract people to apply to work for the Environment Agency. We're doing more around that and thinking about where we advertise our roles, and it's something that companies and organisations should do. To think about what spaces you're getting into. There are certainly sites out there who are LGBT+ inclusive. So, you know, people would perhaps go to that site to say, hey, I'm interested in an inclusive employer, so I'm going to go to that space to look for opportunities. But yeah, as Colin was mentioning as well, if we have meetings in our offices, it's just that feedback from people to say, wow, I felt so included, stuff about the network on notice boards and events, and just having someone in a meeting with a visible symbol, me myself, I remember actually going into the interview, one of the interviews for a job, and one of the panelists had a rainbow mug, and they obviously, when I walked in, and because of my application, they wouldn't know that I was a gay woman, but just seeing that, I felt so comfortable in the interview. So it really does work, and I can't recommend enough to look at that in your workplace.
Yeah, definitely. I think it's really important. And it's funny because when we were discussing this the other day, I remembered someone that I interviewed when I worked at UCL. He said to me that he was walking into UCL and you see the massive building and he thought, okay, another interview. And then he saw the flag and his walk changed and he ran in and he was like, I'm getting this job. I feel already welcome. And he did smash it out the park. And I don't think he was even the best candidate on paper, but he definitely sold himself. And I think that's because we encouraged him to be himself. And I think if we do have those visual aids, it will be really important. I can see that we've got a few questions, which is exciting. So we've got someone asking, working for a small organization where I think I'm the only out colleague, any tips on feeling connected to your community and work? Would anyone like to answer this one?
Yeah, I'm happy to go ahead if there's one to find. So from my perspective, from a workplace perspective, things like this event, obviously you're reaching out, and it must be more difficult. I mean, as Colin said earlier, we work for an organisation of around 10,000 people, so clearly there's going to be more support there, but perhaps thinking about chartered ships and those type of organisations and what groups they have, and there are certainly lots of groups in the wider community as well, workspace wise as well, you know, science communities, engineering communities, look to those workspaces for the LGBT inclusive networks. So yeah, small companies more difficult, especially if you're the only person, but you might be surprised, you might not be the only person. It might just be that you're working with people who aren't out, and sometimes it depends where you are yourself, but sometimes it's for us to get out there and do these things in our workspaces and see what happens. That's what I'd recommend. I don't know if anyone else had anything to add to that, recommendations.
I don't mind just answering the question with a question. Is what would you want from from the WEM Pride to actually assist you with that? What, you know, from other LGBT plus PQ plus people in the WEM sector, or from allies in the WEM sector, what would help there for people in smaller companies? Because I'm used to working in the Environment Agency now, where we've got 10,000 people. There's lots of people there to speak to. There's lots of other LGBTQ plus people. We've got allies. We've got visible signs around the building. In an organisation where there's perhaps very few people, those opportunities are less. So what can we do to assist as allies in the WEM sector?
I think that's a very key question there, Colin, because I think Sarah Ward, I think you are here, but if I'm not mistaken, that was exactly why we started WEM Pride. Is we also know that there isn't the funding in small organizations. They don't have the time or the resource to put time aside to look at their policies and procedures. How can they help their colleagues that are potentially feeling slightly isolated? And we're hoping that by creating this network, it was very much to support those individuals and those organizations, and potentially if they read our policies and it's something that they could implement quite easily within their organizations, that would be helpful. And I hope that everyone on these calls do read our magazine, The Environment, on a monthly basis, and we do try to feature stories in there and tactics on how to help and cope. And I can see that Sarah's joined us, so potentially I don't want to sell your story because it is your story of the WEM Pride network. If you wanted to add anything, Sarah.
Thanks, Fran. Hi, everybody. Sorry, I was trying to stay in the audience because I'm not feeling very well today, but I wanted to show support and solidarity for the awesome work that's obviously going on, and to see our fantastic speakers. Presentations and talks and everything, and I just want to say thank you to all of you, because, you know, really inspiring. Although I did get a phone call during Kara's video, so I'm hoping to catch up with that soon, because it was just, you know, ultimate bad timing. But yeah, just to come in and add to what Fran said, really similar situation for me. That was why I got in contact with CIWEM and said, you know, can we get something started? Because I came out of the academic sector, not really knowing where I was in the sector that I joined, which was the charitable sector. So I work at the West Country Rivers Trust, which is a small charity and obviously a slightly different scale of organisation to massive universities where I was in the academic sector. And so it was a case of me starting conversations, you know, with people going, you know, this is all new to me. I've not been out at work very long. I was out in my personal life for a long time, but never felt sort of comfortable or like it was the right time to come out at work. And then when I changed sector, I decided, right, you know, I need to be 100% me all the time across everything. And so, yeah, just started having conversations with colleagues at work saying, you know, what are we doing around EDI in general, but also, you know, for the LGBTQ community, which I am part of as a pansexual individual, somebody who's also gender questioning, and, you know, not really got any firm answers there, but, you know, is this the sort of thing we can, you know, find a space to talk about at work? And everybody was really receptive and positive. Some allies came forward because they had friends or colleagues or family who, you know, were various different parts of the LGBTQ plus community. And yeah, we set up an EDI working group at West Country Rivers Trust as well. And I know that the Rivers Trust, so the umbrella organisation, that is gathering momentum there as well. So I think just starting those conversations with one or two people that you feel comfortable with, even, you know, if it's allies initially, if you're not sure who else is out at your workplace, just can get things started. And I think for me, it was just becoming brave in myself enough to go, I need this, I want to do this, I'm the only person that can do this, so I've got to do this. It's got to be the right time for you to do it, but also I think it will come back to you in spades. So yeah, just start small and do what you can, and hopefully the experience, as in our speakers talks have shown, although we've had some negative experiences, I can echo Karen's experience in a work environment that I overheard a very difficult conversation for me to hear in terms of people talking about bisexual individuals. I didn't intervene in that particular conversation because I didn't feel confident enough in the workplace to do that. I now would. So I know that everything that I've done since coming out at work has been positive and has helped create positivity in the WEM sector as well. So yeah, that was a bit of a long answer. So thanks for bearing with me. I think Mike had his hand up, but it's gone down. So I don't know if he wants to come in.
I'm struggling with just a left hand, having hurt my shoulder, and I accidentally pressed the button. Apologies.
Definitely no need to apologize. Right. So there are a few other questions that have come out. So we have Brian. Many of the talks relate to any sector. What do we think is different in the WEM sector? Who might like to answer that question?
I'm happy to go with that. It may not be different, but there may currently the only real support network I know of for scientists and engineers is inter-engineering. So inter-engineering is basically engineers rather than the whole of the water and environment sector. So this, Sarah identified that there wasn't that support network there, which is why this started and exists. So thanks to Sarah for doing that. But I'd be interested to know, either in the chat section or the question and answer section, does anybody think there is something different in the WEM sector? Is there something we need to consider more than we perhaps would with pure engineering or the civil side of things, or anything really? It'd be interesting to get people's thoughts on that.
It was something that I think Francesca, we did discuss the other day about monitoring and data. So across this sector, it would involve quite a number of organisations. To have a look, it would be really interesting to have a look at the percentage of people that are LGBTQ+ in the sector. Now, I'm not quite sure. We'd have to think about how we got that information or research that. But what we say is, as the Environment Agency, our work, our employees, our workforce should represent the communities that we serve. So looking at that, in the wider community, and we know that from the government surveys that are sent out, and those statistics, how many people have filled them out and identify as LGBTQ+. So we should be aiming for our workspaces, our workplaces to be the same kind of in the same kind of place, so that we are fully inclusive, and also looking at things like senior leadership. So simply those people who are in positions of influence. So how many people do we have in our organisations that are in senior leadership roles? helping to shape organisations. So it'd be really interesting to look at. I will say one really positive thing, and this might just be me, but I always say I work with a fantastic bunch of people who are generally really lovely, really kind. And I don't know about other sectors. I can't really comment on other sectors, but I would say that for the people I come across are just really kind, and where things have gone wrong, it's sort of like misunderstanding, and there's really been a conversation, and it was about, oh, I need to educate myself and improve my understanding, that kind of thing. So most people are open to being inclusive and just increasing our understanding.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that, Karen. I think just from a personal perspective, I've worked in potentially 7 different industries. As an EA, you can swap around whenever you feel like it, really. And I used to work in the fashion industry. And obviously, we never had the need for these conversations because potentially the best stylists and fashion icons are potentially from the community. So it was a big shock to me from going from the fashion industry to the WEM industry, where I could not understand the reason why people wouldn't be out, because I came from an industry where everyone was out and proud, and actually if you weren't from the community it was abnormal. So I think that having these conversations and these networks have been really helpful for me. I think I said it before, I always thought I was an ally, and I always thought having a lot of friends from the community and things like that I was being really helpful and being my best ally. But actually hearing your stories today and the preparation for this event, I feel I've not done anything for the community really, because I've not been visible. I've not been there to say I'm here if you need me. I've not had those little signs to say here we are inclusive at CIWEM, and it's something that I really want to work on in 2022. And I hope that you will see a massive difference in CIWEM in the next hopefully 12 months when we get things signed off and go to the boards. But it's definitely been really useful for me as an ally to make sure that we are making changes. Sarah, I see that your hand is up.
Thanks, Fran. Yeah, thanks for those helpful comments and supportive comments. And just following up really on some things that Karen said in relation to the question about what's different about WEM. And I think from my perspective, even though, I mentioned about being in the academic sector, moving to the charity sector, I think, and I've been a CIWEM member for over a decade, that kind of thing. And I think I just noticed a difference moving out of maybe the STEM, so the science, technology, engineering, math space, where networks, both for the community and allies, have been around for a long time and have grown up and sort of expanded. But I think, and I know that the WEM sector isn't exclusive in this respect, but I think because beyond the sort of larger consultancies, the engineering firms, there are quite a few smaller companies, as somebody put in the chat, also a member of a small company, where some of the policies, the processes that larger organizations kind of take for granted haven't been in place, whether it's, as Karen mentioned, about monitoring, it's about data. So the Rivers Trust only, I think it was the end of last year, I get confused which year we're in at the moment, did a survey to find out across all of the different Rivers Trusts nationally what we look like in terms of EDI or DNI, because we simply don't know. Which, to get to 2022 and not really know what diversity and inclusivity is like across I'm trying to think how many Rivers Trusts there are regionally, but I can't think off the top of my head. But just to not know, the sort of composition of the employees within such a large group of people, to me was a little bit mind-boggling. And I think that's we've come so far, and yet we've not come so far in other ways. So I think in some ways that's where the WEM sector is different, because we're always really focused and passionate about the WEM sector and about water and the environment, and we're working to make it better. And as you know, people will have seen in the press, our rivers are in an awful state, and so we can often be so focused on the day job that we don't really think about these other things which are so crucially important for the day job. You know, it's connecting with communities of all kinds in all sorts of ways, and so I think that for the benefit of our natural environment, as well as us as, you know, beings that are part of that natural environment. And I think sometimes we forget that in the WEM sector, and that's possibly why it's a little bit different, but you know, that's just sort of my perspective.
Thank you for sharing. I think data is a massive, massive taboo conversation. And if anyone gets an email from CIWEM asking to update your data, that's potentially why. I think we've got a couple more minutes to answer some more questions. There is a question here that we might want to try and answer. How can we avoid coming across homophobic, transphobic and racist comments if this is not a requirement in the recruitment process? My personal feeling just reading that question is that you potentially don't want to work in that company if those are the comments you get in an interview. I think that's quite a strong feeling to have if you go to an interview. Has anyone else on the panel want to any comments on this?
All those items are covered by the Equality Act, so it's actually illegal in the workplace. Unfortunately, it's not illegal outside the workplace. So if these things happen, if you hear homophobic, racist, transphobic, interphobic comments, you have got grounds to speak to someone, whoever that person is, either formally or informally. And if it's your line manager, ask them to deal with it. If it's come from, if it has actually come from your line manager, then you need to go to your grandparent manager, basically. But I think that is where an organisation like the WEM Pride, we could be a source of information and help for that type of thing, especially if it's happening in a smaller organisation where you don't have policies on race, on homophobia, on transphobia. That's where WEM Pride could be a resource for assistance with stuff like that, where, you know, if it was, whether it's on LinkedIn or on the website, we could have a permanent Q&A. This has happened at work. What do I do? What am I right? How can we assist people who are experiencing that? The problem is I can't speak for outside of the UK, because UK law and presumably European law is quite it's quite clear in how it states stuff. I don't know about other countries. I don't know other parts of the world how, for example, where LGBTQ plus people are in effect illegal. How would you protect someone? How would you help someone if you'd asked them to go there as part of their employment? What is the standing there? And I know some companies, I believe there was a bank who made part of one of their buildings an LGBT plus safe space in a country that was not LGBTQ plus safe. So there are things we can do, but I don't know in what context that particular question was asked.
Yeah, I think what we suggested with Barbara is that we will keep these questions, and that we'll be able to answer them on a separate platform as well. There's a couple of questions about allyship that we can potentially finalize the session with. So there's two questions about it. There's one, are there any resources available to support people who want to become allies? And then the second question is, have you done anything specific to actively encourage allies to join up and be visible?
Happy to go on both. There's plenty of information on the internet on being an ally. There's some excellent websites. Stonewall used to have a lot of free downloads from their website, and there was one 10 ways to creating LGBT plus inclusive workplaces. I don't know if that's still a free download or if you have to be a member of Stonewall to get it. There are a number of other sites. There's Flag, which is 2 Fs, like Families and Friends of Lesbians and Gays, more for family support. Lots of information on that website. Interengineering, they have a lot of information. There's the Proud Trust, there's the LGBT Foundation. There's lots of places on the internet where you can get that information. Now, internally, talked about the Environment Agency. When someone signs up as an ally, they get a welcome pack, which has a couple of the Stonewall documents, a certificate to put up near their desk if they have a desk. And we used to give out cards, but I think it's on the back of the certificate now. There's some information on how to be a good ally, how to react to banter and homophobic abuse, and how to stand up for your colleagues. There's about 10 points on the back of it. It used to be on a little credit card size document. There was a question about, do we encourage people? Yes, we do. We hold, before COVID, we used to hold internal events with some of our other networks. So we might do a joint event with our mental health network, our women's network, BAME network, whoever it was, we would work with those networks, do joint events around the country, speak to our employees and sign people up as friends. On our internal EasyNet, we have information. We speak to people, we put stuff in our monthly, weekly buzzes. So we try to be as visible as possible as allies, as friends, and also as members, so that people know we run training events, we do internal prides now that we can't be face to face. So we have events where members of the network, members of the friends of the network, speak to the whole of the Environment Agency, basically. So that the visibility and the information does get us more people joining.
Thank you, Colin. I think all of these questions that we've been reading out, for me, means that people do have passion for what we've been discussing today. And I think that everyone's got great ideas, and I'll do my little advert at the end, but I do think you should join WEM Pride. And if you can be part of the conversation, even if it's just being on our LinkedIn page, and if thoughts come to mind or things happen in the workplace and you want to share and discuss, that is the place. It is a private network in terms of you have to request to join. It's all on LinkedIn. And if you then have more capacity or more time to help us, then please get in contact, and you will be part of these discussions that we have at CIWEM. There's just one last question, and I would really like Karen to answer this, because I think we had this discussion on Thursday. Interesting point that Cara made about being sensitive to the communities they're working in. It's one of the things, bluntly saying to my company, we shouldn't work in places I don't I won't be safe in, or how will you make me safe? But a bit of a different situation when it's more community work based.
Yeah, so yeah, apologies. Our dog has just started barking, so apologies if you hear a dog barking. Someone's rang the doorbell. Yeah, so I did used to do a bit of international work in a previous role. So working internationally, specifically, just to sort of address that. So any kind of travel would be, you know, assessing your particular risk, and anyone should do that anyway. So a risk assessment, but add to that as an LGBTQ plus person, what are the things that are going to make me safe in that country? So most of the time, I'm pretty safe wherever we travel in the world, but as it was mentioned earlier, there's quite a good number of countries that have some very serious penalties, and this is something we need to look at. So companies, it would be something to discuss with your employer about where are you intending me to send me for this piece of work. Carry out a risk assessment, so the company should have that risk assessment. Are there any concerns about the safety of LGBTQ plus people in that country? And then are there controls that you can put in place? Or simply, could someone else do the other work? Now, if you are needed and you have to work, you have to make your own judgment of whether you're comfortable with that. So some people would, I think, as we've discussed, that some people would, for a risk assessment, think, am I going to be out in this environment? So it's not something that's nice to think about, covering up who we are. It's not the space we want to be in, but simply sometimes for your own safety, it's, maybe just not talk about your full self, who you are in those places. Yeah, and that's certainly what we do in the Environment Agency. We consider those risks. I don't know if there's anything else, Francesca, that you wanted to.
No, I think it was just about the risk assessment of going abroad and being honest, and
add to your generic risk assessment the risks for particular groups. So obviously other protected characteristics, it might be a consideration as well.
Definitely. Right. Well, I'm really happy to say we're running 2 minutes late, just because that means that we had a really good discussion today, in my opinion. So I'm just going to share my screen, which is a thank you. Just let me find my slot. And again, I just wanted to say, personally, I'd like to thank the fabulous team working alongside me within the WEM Pride Network, Barbara Woods, for making today happen. And once again, a massive thank you to our speakers, and thank you for spending the time to answer those key questions. We do have an events page on our CIWEM website where you can keep up to date with all our latest webinars and see what's happening, and also revisit the webinars that have already gone past. From a WEM Pride perspective, we are trying to attend London Pride this year. This will be the 3rd year that we've done an application, so fingers crossed it will go ahead this year in June. And last year we qualified for 70 parade places, and we're hoping to do the same this year. If anyone on this call would like to get involved and be part of that team putting us at London Pride, please let me know. I did put my email address in the chat earlier, but if Barbara might be adding it again now, please get in contact with me. And we are always looking for new volunteers to join our branches and networks, and we'd love to hear from you if you would like to get involved. This could be behind the scenes or actually on our screens like you've seen today, so it's up to you. And Barbara will be sharing the email address of our branches for you to make sure that you get involved. I think today, especially for me, hearing the stories that we've heard, it's very important to have a mentor, and it's very important to have maybe a key person that we can go to and ask about professional development and career growth and how to be yourself at work. And At CIWEM, we do offer training to be the best mentor, and we do have a mentoring platform. So if this is something that you're interested in, I would definitely encourage you to go ahead to either one of our training days or be active on our mentoring platform. And for anyone who isn't a member, who should be a member, so CIWEM is a Royal Chartered Professional Body and an independent charity. Our aim is to work towards a safer, more sustainable world, building a global community of water and environmental professionals dedicated to working to the public benefit. And as you can see today, we help to connect local to national to international through our digital series. So it's really important to keep that momentum going. And obviously, being a charity, working for the environment, please find CIWEM's Climate and Ecological Emergency Declaration now in the chat. Thank you for attending the webinar on over 50 years of Stonewall. Is the WEM Pride LGBTQ+ community visible enough? We hope you found these discussions informative and will join us again. So for more details, again, this will be on our website, and I cannot wait for the next event. And I just want to say a massive thank you for attending and a massive thank you for speaking. I don't know if you can see me, but I'm clapping. Thank you very much, everyone. And I can't wait for the next one, and I hope you all enjoy.